So the way I think we're hoping to run this is more as a conversation than like, oh, here's like how you do cost savings. And the first thing I'd like to do is like basically set up like a super easy mental model of like SP profitability. And I just drew it down as a chart here, right? So read it as like profit is a function of whatever is underneath it, right? So profit obviously a function of revenue and cost, right? So revenue minus cost is your profit. And your revenue breaks down into two buckets: block reward revenue and then all other revenue, right? So the money that you get from the network in the form of block rewards, and then the money that you get from anybody else who's willing to pay for whatever service you're offering, right? That could be storage that you're selling, sealing as a service, egress costs, CDN, you name it, right? Like endless possibilities. And the block reward revenue is obviously a function of the quality adjusted power you've added to the network, and then what you're getting in terms of fill per QAP, which is a function of a couple of other things. We can get to that in a second. And Vik actually maybe has a better way to think about like how to model these things that are not just like a linear decay or something. So just like we can talk about that a little bit, like how can you maybe think about projecting block reward revenue. And when we go over to cost, it's obviously a function of your cost of goods sold, which is gas, sealing, pledge collateral, and maybe some other bucket, just like for completeness sake. And then you have all other OPEX, so labor, rent, utilities, insurances, leases, if you're leasing your equipment, whatever. Then you get to EBITDA, then you depreciate your CapEx by some accounting standard, probably. So like curious like how people are thinking about that. You might have an interest that because you might finance your pledge collateral by taking out a loan. So you have some interest rate that you're paying. I don't know. I'm curious to hear what people's thoughts are there. And then depending on where you operate, you take out taxes, and there you go. That's your profit, right? So now you're down to like net income. I don't know. Like this is just like the mental, very obvious like mental model of like how to think about it. What I'm hearing a lot from SPs around is like it's hard to make this work, right? It's hard to make enough block reward revenue to cover everything that's in cost. So I'm curious, like, what might be the biggest buckets here? And maybe Vuk, you can add your perspective on like what you've done to like drive down gas, sealing, pledge collateral, how you're doing it, how you're able to like break even or even turn a profit. And then, yeah, also curious to hear from Seal, like how you're thinking about this. What are the biggest drivers? How are you thinking like which levers you're going after first? Like where do you think you've squeezed everything out you can, or where you're just hitting a roadblock? Or even on the revenue side, like what are difficulties that you have here in terms of projecting out like what you're getting in terms of block rewards, or even breaking into these other revenue categories? Is that something that's on your roadmap? So yeah, I'm just going to put this out and we can basically take it wherever. I think like Vik is probably the best to talk about like what can you expect in terms of fill per QAP based on what's happening in the network, and what are some good like ways to think about like projecting that. But yeah, we can really have a discussion about any of these buckets, and hopefully that'll give us some ideas on where to dig a little deeper, where maybe we can do more in terms of best practice sharing or something like that.
Yeah, and also the fill per QAP one is interesting, not just if you're a storage provider, but also if you're trying to match liquidity to those who need it. So if you have some excess fill, or you want to make a pool of fill, so this would apply for anyone doing DeFi solutions or anything like any other form of fixing capital market inefficiencies, what you like expect to get from the network is entirely a function of, number one, how the protocol is specified, and two, how people interact with that protocol. So how people onboard and what way they do that onboarding, what kind of what kind of fill plus rate that they might want to onboard at, the rate at which sectors are renewed or not. So the reason I say this is because I've talked to some storage providers, and I think like the part that is kind of a black box is what they expect to get from the protocol and how that it is expected to change over time. And there's like this thing where you have a crypto econ model, right, for all these things of how the circulating supply of the token will work, all those token dynamics. And then you have like your business model, right, with the things that Lucas was just talking about, your CapEx, your OpEx, your cost of goods sold, all those like traditional accounting like line items, and how do you take those two things and put them together in a way that makes sense to you? Because like to me, right, your costs are kind of a black box in the sense that I'm not involved with the way that you structure your business and like how your bandwidth costs work, how your energy costs work. But to me, the protocol is quite clear. I can take like the actions that you and all the other storage providers do, put them into a model, and then see what the network token, like macroeconomics, would look like. But maybe for you, it's the opposite. It's like I know exactly what my costs are. I know what to expect for those going forward. But what's maybe more of a black box is how my interactions with the protocol will now feed back to me in terms of like fill revenues or like collateral requirements or costs. So I think like the session in my head is a way for like both of us to make the others not a black box to each other, to like have like a more complete model for how like you might want to understand your interactions with the economy, and then also how I like can better understand how these things like fill, QAP, onboarding, etc. Apply to your specific like business, because it's different for everyone has different comparative advantages. And so when I talk to storage providers, it's like I'm not sure what to tell you to do, but what we can do is give all the information you need to make the most optimal business decisions you can for yourself. So that's kind of what I hope to get out of this too.
Cool. Should we start with like maybe inputs from my side, and maybe we can do so. So, by the way, is the mic working?
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
Okay. So for us, so what we're trying, so in general, like whatever I tried to do like in the past 2 years was mainly focused on really simplifying all of this. Like there is so much complexity here that like we're pretty confident that like there is no like single way of doing things, and there is no right way of doing things. And because of the so many parameters, there is also a lot of space for errors, which is a big driver of cost, because whenever like there are like so many options, like storage providers would often make mistakes. So for us, important piece initially was figuring out how to onboard efficiently capacity, which means which is basically here. So we focused a lot on reducing the ceiling cost, and we focused a lot on figuring out how to like onboard sectors by sending messages on chain in an efficient way. So like even today, if you're trying to send 100 sectors on chain, like it's gonna take you like a couple of blocks, and like if you're trying to like fit everything in one block, like probably gas is gonna spike, and like there are like so many issues regarding that. On the other hand, like ceiling cost was also pretty high, mainly because of the fact that like a lot of capacity was not being utilized all the time, because storage providers were waiting for the data instead of onboarding capacity, because it was known that verified deals are the way to go, and that committing capacity was inefficient and non-profitable, which is just an opinion, because onboarding capacity all the time with a particular ceiling capacity can be more efficient if that ceiling capacity is being used all the time. Now, of course, there are like some differences on when you're trying to snap that committed capacity with a verified deal, but there is also a lot of advantages when you're thinking about the fact that by snapping those CC sectors, you're actually able to probably sell storage in an easier way, because now you have ways of committing to a particular number of pips a day. Yeah.
And faster.
Yeah, absolutely faster. Yeah. While if you're just sealing just in time, then like you're introducing so many coordination issues, and that's super hard to manage. And that's where we are today. So probably also
like,
one.
Can you talk a little bit like what factor did you decrease gas, and see like what kind of like scale did you achieve? Just like where did you start? What's the percentage gains that you squeeze?
Sure. So on the gas cost, it's hard to say, because that is dependent on the network circumstance. So for example, right now like blocks are kind of empty. So like right now like the value is not that big, but like in the context of gas cost going up and having like blocks that are full, figuring out how to actually use that capacity well.
Yeah, like you can control base fee,
yes,
right? But you can control message volume. So you were like,
yes, on message volume, like there are like a couple of things. So you can think of having blocks, which is a particular capacity that the network can absorb, and figuring out how to like slowly pass messages on chain. The second one is figuring out how you aggregate messages. So like if you want to aggregate like 100 sectors, does it make sense for you to aggregate 100 sectors or not? And how do you actually like spare space in the blocks? Those are super interesting, but like this is more like a longer term thing. Right now, like it's not that important because like gas is super cheap. But it's gonna get more and more important. Now, the sealing cost is something that we reduced substantially. So I was working with the supranational team on this, and we've been able to like first change the medium required for PC1 from having to use RAM to using SSDs. And when you're able to use SSDs, of course, like it is much more scalable because now you can put many SSDs in parallel, while RAM does not scale particularly well because you would need to have first a enterprise-grade CPU, which is super expensive, that can address like a terabyte of RAM, and RAM by itself is a much more expensive storage medium. So this is probably more than 70% like reduced in terms of cost. Now, the issue is that you still have like some coordination issues if you want to do verified deals right away. We are doubling down on CC capacity here because like we think that decoupling like all the different processes is more valuable than not sending one another message on chain. And yeah, like the third one in the context of pledge collateral, our core thing is staking. So like for us, this is really not a cost. Mm-hmm. We kind of see like mining as a way to deploy efficiently liquidity into the protocol. So this is, so everything that we do is towards like helping us lock more liquidity. So for us, sure, this is probably the biggest cost, but this cost is more in the context of,
it's like a revenue source.
Yeah,
for you.
so yeah, it's more in the context of here, and it kind of becomes also revenue for us because that's our core business. And if we go on the right side, what we see here is like a bunch of other things which are related to the hardware. Our view is that like, so we are of course not owning hardware. We have storage providers in our network that only do provide storage, and we help them increase the performance of the storage. So we are really like, John is like doing an awesome job there, helping people get 40% more from their hardware in terms of performance. And we are also trying to help them reduce cost. So thinking about having higher density SAPs and having the same OpEx. And yeah, like ultimately we are going more towards a model where we want to enable anyone that has like any storage to be able to participate in the Filecoin network without any liquidity requirement, without anything to do with Filecoin. Like we just want any hard drive on the planet to be accessible on the Filecoin network. Now, the reason why we want to do that is because we want to increase like the utility that the network can provide through, of course, like working with like a bunch of clients that have different requirements. And those requirements can be, we want to archive something for 30 years and we need the cheapest possible medium. And we need to have some guarantees that the data is actually going to be there because we are archiving something for a very long period of time and we might retrieve that in 5 years, but we want to have guarantees that that is actually going to be there. Especially when you're working with providers that are not like archival companies that have been in the space for decades, it is very important for those clients to have certainty that they can actually.
So you're basically saying like your storage offering that you can do with the 30-year guarantees, etc., is so differentiated that that's where you're going. That's what you're going after. So you're basically saying like block rewards, you can like, you know, you'll keep an eye on it, but you're growing other revenue sources like real storage deals on the side, and like specifically in the archival space and like with the 30-year stuff.
Yeah. So block rewards in general in the Filecoin protocol are there so that we have enough time for the tech to mature before this needs to kick in. That's why we have an exponential decay. In the beginning, the tech is not existent, so the rewards are super high, and it takes a lot of effort to even onboard a sector, let alone a sector with data on. But over time, block rewards go down, meaning that like tech needs to mature at the same time, and like you'll have two curves that at some point intersect. We are somewhere there on the intersection right now, and that's also why like most SPs are complaining on the profitability. The reason is that they just focus on this, and they expect that this is going to be there forever, but that's just not the way that the network was conceived. The network is not a proof of work network. The network is a network that allows storage to exist on Filecoin. Filecoin is not Chia, nor we are trying to compete with Chia. Filecoin is the only network out there that provides like a way to provide the utility, but at the same time have formal verifiability of the storage actually being there, which is very powerful, and it was very hard to do. Now, what is important though is that actually doing this is hard because of a variety of reasons. First, of course, tooling, but also reputational. So like if you're an insurance company and you have like a requirement to store like tens of petabytes a day, you're not really super excited about using Filecoin, because Filecoin exists 2 years, you're trying to archive something for 30 years. Yeah, that's a bit of a hard sell, but it's getting better. And again, like those block rewards that were super high in the beginning are also kind of helping get there, because like with high block rewards in the beginning, there is also a lot of hype. Many participants get in. That helps with PR, that helps with brand reputation, and we are slowly getting to the point where Filecoin is recognized. And yeah, ultimately, also the onboarding of the data is very important. So like what we are doing is we are abstracting away all the complexity on actually taking data and storing that to a particular storage provider. So in our particular case, storage providers are just providing the storage, and we are helping get more and more deals.
So are you charging for that? So is there something like business development as a service where you say, we get you deals and you pay us for that or something? Or I guess maybe it's like a little bit more implicit, but you're basically saying, hey, we do all this stuff for you. You don't have to have your own sales pipeline. You don't have to do any of that. We'll get you the clients. We'll help you with the tooling. You're just operating as, you just focus on this, on the storage, which is like, how much storage times the price. And you're doing like a bunch of other services, right, for the network, like sealing, like sales, like, right? Like,
yeah. So for the BD efforts, of course, we have like a bunch of inbound requests for search, but we also try to share like those inbound requests with other folks, potentially seal storage as well, and like a few other folks. Now, what's important to understand is that initially what we tried is we don't want the SP to risk at all. The reason for that is that at the end of the day, like we're doing staking. So like our main business is liquidity. Yeah. So if the SP goes down, like we are really like in a bad shape, because now we need to figure out how to do disaster recovery and so on, which we have the ability to do, but like it's a pain in the ass. So like for us, understanding the risk of the SP and making sure that the SP is always profitable in a healthy state is very important. So whenever we are partnering with someone, we would go as far as asking them the cost of their rack space and really understanding what their cost profile is, because we don't want at any point in time to increase the risk that they have.
How effective is that? So you're doing due diligence on like your SP network. Like, has it worked so far? Like, what are some learnings? I don't know. Like, what are you seeing? I mean, I guess that's like a pretty unique insight into like how efficiently are they operating on the cost side? Like, how sophisticated are they in terms of thinking about revenue? How sophisticated are they? Right. Like, so I'm curious, like, what you're learning. Like, maybe you can talk a little bit about the conversation.
Ideally, we can simplify the game for everybody. And one of the things that really won me over, and again, I'm not the crypto expert, I don't understand a lot of this stuff, but I understand enterprise business, and I understand things like a McDonald's franchise, where you have independent owner-operators that are doing one thing, they're servicing the local community, whereas the franchise umbrella is providing a lot of infrastructure, the branding, and whatnot. And if you look at this picture and all these moving points in here, the reason why we fell into this trap in this one side, because that was the closest thing to a passive income generator that people could plug in, program, and walk away from, and as long as the stuff didn't blow up, it just worked. all this other stuff, all the ESPAs that I've been to and whatnot, the recurring pattern is, and I've started to do a little bit of a survey at the end of the ESPA for the recurring visitors, how much of your human resource budget is allocated to finding where your next meal is going to come from? Overwhelmingly, consensus is 40% of all their human expenditure of resources is trying to find out where that next deal is coming from. This framework that Vuk and the team have put together, in my opinion, again, I'm not as well informed as probably most of the people in this room, allows for us to work together as a consortium of like-minded service providers and plug into the complicated bits up here. In the way I see it, anybody who can sign up and wants to build the best storage provider or the service provider of a service in this network, if you want to focus on that, you can plug into this, and the rest of the team is going to be taking care of the top-level, very complicated moving bits that if every service provider, all 3,000, 4,000 service providers are trying to do exactly the same thing, that's an incredibly wasteful use of human resource capital in the network to have that level of redundancy. Just by forging the alliances and coming up with terms and conditions to take the simple passive income model that comes from that one corner and fan that out across the entire revenue opportunities for the network, that's a huge win, I believe.
Yeah, and
it gets you like cost savings, right? Because I mean, what you said, right? Like if you then form this consortium, you spend less on labor because you don't need to employ that salesperson. You can just join the consortium, right? Like so, you can get some efficiencies there. I agree. Like fundamentally, makes sense to like specialize,
stupid and
right?
simple, and I'm going to say stupid and simple is storage. It's complex, but you can template it. And before I joined this team, I had the advantage of peering into operations. And every person I helped, that built the library of templates that to optimize the storage. We've recently touched base with some of the picnic infrastructure. In less than 7 days, we increased the overall efficiency and performance by 40%. That's something that anybody that wants to play and participate in this, we should all benefit from that, because it's not like we're inventing something new. We're just taking a look at the same thing and applying best practices. And once those best practices become the tribal knowledge of the consortium of like-minded service providers, we all get better. We all compete. We can compete and iterate faster than a huge institution like Amazon.
Yeah. I'd also love to hear from Steve, like how you guys are thinking about this, like how you're thinking about like driving the cost, how you're thinking about like, you know, grouping and like pooling knowledge and like, you know, reducing redundancies or something.
Yeah, first of all, you should understand that my role is entirely on the left-hand side.
Okay. Yeah.
So we very much understand that the dynamics of the business need to change. It's really been always part of the model.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say we are one of the franchises, but we see the dependence on the franchise system. Like we need a repeatable, profitable, you know, community of storage providers to partner with us to really do, you know, decentralized storage right. We you know, can't do this by ourselves. Yet we have you know, headed down a path that is it's a different model altogether, right? The intent was never to just live off of block reward.
Yeah.
So I mean, we are 25 people plus strong. We are hiring, but we are venture backed, and we have a roadmap for product that extends, you know, beyond storage. But today it is all about storage, and so my time is very focused on how do we really build out the revenue side of the deal. BD as a service is something that we do think about because we, again, need partners. Our issue is not that we've got excess storage capacity. Our issue is that we don't have enough storage for the capacity we're trying to bring on board. You know,
what's the bottleneck there? Like, what's the bottleneck to not just capital constraints, like not being able to, like, buy more hard drives or something?
Well, part of it is how you is network stability. How do you actually architect it in a way that we can handle it? Right. We're talking about, you know, bringing petabytes of data onto the network. So, you know, we've got our own internal operations that we are working to optimize, if you will. Right. We've got a very capable, experienced team doing that, but that's not to say we don't, you know, really value the work that's being done. Like I am oftentimes asking the question, you know, hey, I see something that, you know, that PL has put out with the intent of helping storage providers. Like, how does that compare to what we're doing? Like we're building a lot of this stuff ourselves.
Right.
We can't wait, I guess, is part of things. So we're building a lot of this stuff ourselves. And the question for us will be, is what we build, does it stay far enough ahead of what's available that we continue to do it? Or are the tools that are available to storage providers, are they catching up to a place that either we'll start contributing our own code back, or we just start using the code that PL puts out, and then we focus on the next thing. So that's a constant sort of balancing act for us. But part of it too has been when you move to an enterprise conversation and you've got an SLA that you've got to step up to, we're finding it challenged to find another storage provider who can step up to the same level of service level that we are investing a lot of money in trying to fulfill. Like before the end of the year, we will be SOC 2, ISO, HIPAA compliant, and so these are the deals that we're looking for. We're very interested in talking to SIs about large enterprise kind of deals, but like, who else are we going to do this with? We would love nothing more than to have a dozen go-to SPs that we know we could partner out with, and if we're going to sign a 20 petabyte deal, it's like, okay, if we're still heading down the Phil Plus program path, I mean the resonance of the message that 5 copies going into this decentralized network, I mean it resonates well. It's one of the aspects of differentiation.
Interesting.
And so we need to work with other SPs to be able to make this work. So that's more the nature of our challenge. Now we do have people that are figuring out how do we optimize the moving parts, the variables, so that we are smart on the block reward side, certainly on the cost side. I recognize the need to get smarter on the cost side. I mean, hiring like forensic accountants that can actually model, down to the penny basically. One of the things that's becoming clear is when we have worked with other SPs for other copies, it's been a little bit of you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. You guys take copies this time, and next time you do a deal, bring copies to us. Now I think it's understood that whatever fiat currency comes in for the deal, a portion of that needs to go to the SP as well. Like we're not going to take deals anymore that don't generate revenue in addition to block reward. And we are still at a place where huge deals that we've signed, like we have tens and tens of petabytes of opportunity with CERN, and that's an exciting use case for the entire community. But I'll tell you what, like I've pulled my foot off the accelerator there because we don't have a fiat relationship with CERN. Now that's a platform for opportunities to a lot of storage buyers across CERN. We're working with Atlas. Atlas, even though it's one of the biggest projects with the Hadron Collider, it's just one of many across the network of.
So it's almost like a foot in the door, and then like, hey, let's talk if you have other storage needs.
Yes, but the hey, let's talk part doesn't really happen until what we're doing with Atlas, to the tune of tens and tens of petabytes, really is operating in a smooth, efficient way. And we've got our own challenges to make that work. We're getting there, but we need SP partners who can be part of that as well to make that smooth and efficient. Then we can peel out to other parts of the CERN organization. So
can I ask about, like, I don't know if this is like too far off topic, so everybody jump in, but like your pitch, right? Like, what do you we have time?
No, but yeah, maybe a minute or two.
Okay, just like your pitch, right? Like right now you're able to, you said you're being smart about block rewards, so you generate probably some portion of revenue from block rewards, and you're probably able to use that to like, bring down the price that you have to charge or that you can like offer to somebody. Like, what is part of your like storage pitch? Like when you go and have a conversation, say like, are you competing on price? Are you competing on immutability?
Well, I really don't like the fact that storage providers have kind of been pitted against each other, and the message to the marketplace is, hey, come to our network because we've got our SPs competing with each other. See who you can get to offer you the lowest price. Right? That's not a friendly message to the community. Yet you can find it all over. You can find it on YouTube videos. You can find it in collateral. We should be competing on feature function, which what I like about what you're proposing here is like if we can get to a cost structure where you've got a large network of SPs that are functioning off a comparably competitive cost structure, then ultimately we are competing effectively on
features and
feature function. Like our intent is to go vertical. First, we have a generalized storage and retrieval product, but then you do something specific for legal holds, specific for AI, specific for genomics, that kind of thing. And like we should become like the best genomics solution provider out there. And somebody else, their SP becomes the best, at legal hold or whatever it is. That's the kind of competition that I think is healthy for market, but asking us to compete on cost structure, what it does is it forces everybody to start to play, I guess, kind of funny games on the blockchain side, or on the block reward side. And I'm concerned that if and when the market returns, we come out of this economic cycle, the price goes up again, guess what? Everybody becomes lazy again. You stop thinking about the details around your cost model, right? So something needs to change there. I think we need to tier our SPs in a way that you are operating with like tiers of cost structures and objectives that vary. Pitting everybody up against each other for the lowest price is not the game we should be playing.
Yeah. So, Vuk, I know we're a little bit over on time, but I think there are different layers to competition when we talk about Filecoin as a competitive solution. The first is, what is the network, like what is Filecoin the network competing with, and that is the cloud, right? That is an obvious like one-to-one. Then it's like, okay, how are we getting there? And I think it is true that you want to achieve that like efficient marketplace by some kind of competition amongst individual players, but in like a cooperative manner, right? So it's like I think the part that's missing, and maybe in the messaging, which could be better, is that it's not just a competition game, it's a cooperative competition game. That's also how we set like the block reward structure too, to be like the block rewards are dispersed to the network as it grows, as like a function of how much storage is onboarded. So like so you are competing, like it is true, you are competing with the person next to you to be more cost efficient, but you're also working together to grow the network. And like sometimes those two can be conflated. And there's another thing which you don't actually, and which you brought up, which I want to be very clear, is you don't have to just compete on costs. You can compete on comparative advantages, right? Because when you have a like dispersal of nodes, everyone has a slightly different thing that they can lean upon to maybe one sort. But what I'm trying to say is like, if you have some storage provider whose advantage is cost reduction, you don't have to make cost reduction your advantage. You can be like, okay, fine, you're going to be ruthlessly efficient with your costs, but I can't do that because I don't want to do that because that will compromise the quality of my service. But I'll have better quality of service, which means I can get other types of deals, and so maybe I'll have higher costs, but my revenues will be different, will be more differentiated too, and maybe more sustainable for me. So like, but that is still competition. It is not competition to the
on our pitch we would never say in our pitch, here's why we're cheaper than this other SP. We would never say that. In fact, the opposite would more likely be true.
SLA, you say like all.
Here are the values associated with it. Now we have to use the cheaper pitch when we're talking about Wasabi, when we're talking about Backblaze, when we're talking about AWS. Yeah. But that's a message about the ecosystem. That's a message about the underlying technology. We're not gonna try to put price point pressure on our other SPs.
Right, but to some extent that may be okay, right? Because like you're not trying to necessarily like put someone else out of like business per se. You're just trying to strengthen your own. And if you can't compete on cost, there's no reason not to.
That's right. But ultimately, you'd like to see it result in better margins for those SPs as we all compete against the alternatives, as opposed to competing with each other.
You don't. Yeah, exactly. You don't want price fixing, right? And because then you just evolve market wise into another AWS. You still want that competition because you want to be able to have a network in which you find the most efficient market price. Yeah. And that does, to some extent, happen by saying, hey, I can provide a cheaper rate, and maybe it is a cheaper rate than the storage provider next to me, but it's a cheaper rate than the rest of the competition in the cloud storage business.
Well, hopefully that's way down on the list of bullet points for why they buy you. Totally. It's not
So,
in the top 30.
Right, right.
What we don't want, and I think what you're saying, is we don't want to engage in the death spiral of a race to the bottom on price alone. But if we establish a floor here, the basement level, that for Tier 4 archive, which is what we do now, and everything else is a gimme on top of that, this, from my perspective, this created a situation where the network as a whole isn't price competitive with the other options out there. So there is an incentive to drive down total, if you set the floor at Tier 4 archive, there is a threshold, there is a pain point there of if you can't get down to this level, we are, as a network, are not going to play. And I would challenge folks in the room, and you in particular, fiat cost per month, Tier 4 archive. This took us down a rabbit hole that's not sustainable. What do you think in terms of fiat revenue per terabyte, we should have as the least common denominator for all the participants that are going to grow forward into feature differentiation as we go forward?
So we are exploring the answer to that question right now as we consider how much of what we charge should be passed back to other SPs, right? That's part of it. We are using right now for, I guess, lack of enough market information on what price point works in market. We are using a $7 per TIB per month watermark simply because Wasabi is a very interesting price comparison in market. We believe that the day is coming, will come, where the benefits of what blockchain-based storage offers allow a premium to be had over that price point. But right now, that we use on the top side, and then the bottom side is very, I'll call it exploratory. I think that the numbers we use are probably higher than what other SPs. Like I hear people taking deals that are levels below what we would do.
Or paying for them. Right, like
What's that?
or paying for them, or paying.
Yeah.
For, there is a world where you have negative storage prices, right? Where you make enough block rewards that you
Yeah.
can cross subsidize. Right, like
Yeah,
there
we would not
was
do
a
that.
world, right? There was a world, like which I
right.
think is what you're saying. Like, well, if you have block reward revenue that's so high that you can just like not only ignore revenue but buy
Yeah.
revenue.
That's bad
right?
business
Like,
101.
exactly.
I mean, it really is, but that's exactly what happened. I'm totally in agreement with you. There is some threshold. It's not price or cost collusion. It is a threshold that is the economics of the business.
Right.
And the better we can normalize around it, because we're all using a very efficient, architecture, cost, base to do this, the better off we'll all be.
I just wanted to get, I haven't asked you, every aspect, this is one of the questions I ask. Where is that ceiling, that floor, that threshold, where I can still make money if I threw away block rewards? Because again, that poisoned the pool because it didn't reflect the true price and it didn't incentivize people to become more efficient.
Yeah.
And so if that happens, where's the floor? And so, thanks.
Yep. Maybe one last thing. I think we want to compete, but we want to compete on a product offering. Right now, we don't have a product offering. So really competing doesn't mean anything. If you want to reduce the absolute cost, what does it mean? Like it's just absolute cost, like for a product that does not exist. So we are really not even able to compete right now because there are no product tiers. Like no one is talking about that. So before we can actually compete, and like we should have like a way to like really differentiate the different product tiers, and we should have consensus on what Filecoin is good for which particular product tier right now, and how do we actually get to like all the other product tiers, and how do we make sure that we can compete with the cloud providers there, but really provide that SLA that clients that need. This is always going to allow us to be more competitive in terms of like resources available for R&D, making the tech better and better for each of the SPs or whoever is building the tech.